Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Staying in My Lane podcast with me, Lindsay. I did an introduction episode and dropped it March 1st, which felt kind of empowering because it's a new month. We have a new moon. Everything is just energy. There's so much new energy in the air. And I felt so empowered to be able to share vulnerably my life. So I also dropped episode 1 where I discussed with my friend Sam the struggles of motherhood, conversations about growing up, pet turkeys and bear hunting, all the things, and just the nitty-gritty truth of not being able to have time to ourselves as moms. And acknowledging that mom guilt is something that I want to normalize. I think as moms, we are expected to hold it together and expected to balance all of the things. Whether it's going to 5 or 6 different practices a week, having food ready to go on the table when you get home, taking time for yourself at night and balancing being a full-time working mom or a stay-at-home mom who doesn't get the time to leave the house. Those are all really normal feelings, and I want to talk about how to deal with that mom guilt. Acknowledging the feelings, practicing that self-compassion, avoiding comparing yourself to other moms, and prioritizing that self-care. I think it's really hard for us to accept the help when we need and focus on the positive aspects of our parenting styles, which understanding that making those mistakes is a normal part of motherhood. No mom is perfect. And if the guilt feels really overwhelming, considering seeking that professional help and being really honest when you need that help. I have 3 children, and I want to be really transparent in the fact that my children have struggled, and there have been behavior issues. I feel, people think I'm a social worker and I magically have the answer to fixing problems sometimes. And I think that's kind of a normal expectation with certain professions that you just, have the magic answer and can sometimes be a miracle worker. And I am far from. So I think it's important to recognize, as a mom, myself, I don't have the perfect family. And my children struggle with behavior. My children struggle with emotional regulation. My children struggle with depression and anxiety. And it's hard. I wish I had an answer. I wish I had the ability to fix it. I wish I had the ability to take away experiences that have negatively impact my children. And I think we all feel that way as moms. But recognizing and accepting that feeling by not dismissing the guilt, but understanding that it can be a sign that you deeply care for your children is the first thing that moms need to take a step back and really think about. We have this mom guilt because we love our children unconditionally. And that is amazing. And that is beautiful. And please acknowledge that for yourself. And don't compare yourself to anyone else. Be kind to who you are and treat yourself with that same understanding that you would offer to a friend who's facing, similar challenges in their life as a parent. And I can already see a lot of you rolling your eyes because I'm going to push that self-care. And it's taken me a really long time to make that time for myself every day, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 30, but making time for activities that help you relax and recharge. Maybe it's taking a bath with some lavender Epsom salts, or, getting a Starbucks drink, or taking a drive, even going to Target. Just, try not to overspend because we all know that's difficult. But just don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk to your partner, talk to your family, talk to your friends for support when you feel like you need it. And again, this podcast is meant to normalize these feelings. This podcast is meant to be able to have that feeling of not being alone. And I really want you to lean in and learn from valid guilt. If guilt really arises and springs up from a specific situation, use it as an opportunity to reflect on how you can make adjustments, how you can fix your parenting style. One thing for me is and maybe it's because I was younger as a mom, but I would lose my shit. Okay? I'm just going to be really transparent. I was so dysregulated in my own emotions and I did not know how to deal with that I yelled at my children. I would go and hide in a closet or hide in the bathroom and just cry and scream. And, yelling really creates that fight or flight feeling for children. Yelling at your child can actually harm their mental health and damage your relationship with them. There's a difference between yelling and having an authoritative voice. And the yelling can really perpetuate an unhealthy communication pattern and lower their self-esteem. And sometimes I blame myself for the anxiety and the depression symptoms that I've seen in my children. Yelling can cause those similar results to physical punishment, including increased anxiety and stress and depression. And once I really acknowledged that, I didn't want it to damage the parent-child relationship that I had. I wanted to set a positive example on creating a healthy communication pattern, and being able to set an example on how I regulate my emotions and how I resolve conflict with my husband in front of the children, how I resolve conflict in my life with other people in front of my children so that they are able to see what a healthy communication style, what a healthy relationship, what a healthy mother, what a healthy wife, what a healthy woman looks like, because I want them to have a healthy understanding of what conflict resolution looks like with my spouse, with my friends. If they're seeing that, I want them to know that we can resolve conflict calmly. So for me, here's some things that have worked for me. Not responding immediately to bad behavior. And I know that's a really hard thing, but when we give that reaction to our kids, that's what they're responding to. Giving ourselves time to transition when we get home from work. If you need to take 10 minutes and go on a drive before you walk through that door so that you can be calm and relaxed, then do that. Preparing yourself mentally for situations that trigger you. If you know that your children throwing something across the room or yelling or being excited and jumping all over you when you get home, prepare yourself mentally for that situation and find out what's exactly triggering you in that moment. I know this probably sounds really silly, but taking deep breaths and forcing a smile or a laugh. I feel like sometimes we take situations so seriously that we lose that ability to find humor in chaos. Reframing the situation can also be something that can really help. I've had to learn to step back and look at it from a different perspective, because I feel if I don't, then it's not going to give me the clarity that I need to find better ways to respond. It can be so easy to say, practice self-care, take a nap, take some time for yourself. But we all know as moms, having a clean home is exhausting and it can take a lot of effort. But for me, I'm the opposite. I will, and I'm going to be so honest when I say this, and I don't know if I've really ever said this out loud, but I am an OCD cleaner. I have anxiety anytime anything is out of place. So for me, taking that time and sitting down and stopping that cleaning or stopping organizing or stopping the vacuuming obsessively, that is hard for me. And my husband, bless his soul, he helps me so much with household chores, and we really are a team when it comes to cleaning our home, taking care of the kids. But I know I have friends who for them getting out of bed and cleaning is hard. And where do we start? Where do we normalize that that's hard? We can fall into this depressive state of having to force ourselves to do things because we don't know where to start. We don't know where to begin. How do we get ourselves out of bed and create a schedule? How do we stop going out to eat and going through drive-thrus because we are feeling the depression coming on and we don't want to cook? We don't want to clean. And, that can lead to an overwhelming amount of guilt. It can relate to an overwhelming amount of anger or resentment in our partners. And that can contribute to feelings of stress and worsen the depression symptoms as well. Low energy, difficulty concentrating, feeling overwhelmed and hopeless, and it, impacting our self-esteem. You're not going to want somebody to come over to your home if you have a cluttered home and you feel that shame and that guilt, because that can really exacerbate feelings of inadequacy and guilt, especially for the moms that feel the pressure to maintain that clean living space. So where do we start? What do we do if we're struggling and we don't know how to get out of it? For me, it took me years to acknowledge that I have an obsessive compulsive cleaning issue. And this is kind of the opposite of that, right? So acknowledging our feelings and understanding that your cleaning difficulties are not something to be ashamed of. They can be related to your depression, and don't blame yourself for that. But we can set small goals and break down the cleaning tasks into manageable chunks of time and focus on achieving those small wins and really celebrating that. For me, with being the opposite, I've had to find ways to create in my Google Calendar. I clean bathrooms on Mondays and Wednesdays. I vacuum on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and, all the little things in between. Because for me, I feel like I was missing out on spending time with my children and being able to calm myself down and relax at night, because I was so focused on having this picture perfect home for myself, not for anybody else, but I want a clean home with things. Literally, if a picture frame was out of the way that I had moved it, I would get anxiety. And I think that comes from a lack of control that I had prior to being married to my husband now. And I just really want to take this time to acknowledge that there are reasons that we do the things we do, right? It's not just because we're crazy. It's not just because we're controlling. And when you're in situations where you have a loss of control and a lack of control over your own life, or you feel scared or nervous, that can really affect you in the following years. And it's really essential to take time and reflect on what's creating that sense of, control and power. And I don't think it's always intentional, right? I mean, we're not going out trying to be controlling and trying to be overbearing. So I think that's where asking for help comes in, and communication. I feel like a lot of problems and issues in life can be solved with clear communication and looking at the communication patterns and the ways that we communicate with each other. So for me, communicating with my husband and telling him, hey, I am feeling so overwhelmed with, I can't relax. I can't. And constant cleaning can be a trauma response. Individuals who've experienced trauma, we may feel they need to clean constantly and sanitize our surroundings as a way to regain some sense of safety and control, which encompasses everything I just said. For instance, a person who grew up in a hoarder's home and I have known quite a few people who have, may develop obsessive cleaning habits as an adult. However, for me, that wasn't the case. I grew up in a really clean home, and I used to clean a lot when I was younger because that made me feel secure. And then when I lost that control in my relationship with my first husband, I wanted that security feeling. I wanted the feeling of control, which was something that in that time period in my life, I lost. And I lost who I was, and I lost that feeling of security in myself. And that's when I began seeking validation and approval from people, from anybody in my life, honestly. I clung on so hard to relationships that now looking back were so unhealthy and were so manipulative, but I didn't care in that moment because all I wanted to have was that control, and I wanted that security in my life to make me feel important and to make me feel good. I think that we seek validation as moms and as women because, we have low self-esteem, and people may seek that validation to compensate for those feelings of inadequacy in themselves that they feel. Fear of isolation. People may seek that validation to avoid being rejected. I had to really learn how to validate myself. And I talk about that in my intro briefly. And that's setting those boundaries and practicing assertiveness, which for me, practicing that assertiveness was so hard. You guys, it was so hard. And focusing on the positive things in my life. That self-love really was a hard thing to create for myself after I was divorced and in that healing stage. I had to learn to trust my judgment again and listen to my own needs and listen to myself, following my intuition. And seeking validation as a mom means feeling a strong need to constantly receive that reassurance or approval from other people, particularly partners and spouses. I feel, family members and friends as well, about our parenting abilities. Are we doing it right? And a lot of that can stem from the insecurities about whether we are doing a good job as a mother. And I think social media has portrayed such a perfect, ideal picture of what moms need to do. And, the home baked goods for, a class party, or being able to drive to 10,000 practices a week and have dinner ready to go. And I think that creates a lot of pressure for moms, and kind of feeling how to navigate that. How do we navigate that? We might seek validation because of our internal doubt, social comparison, and, some of it can be generational trauma. We feel the need to do what our moms or our grandmothers did. And a lot of it could be breaking generational trauma and not being sure on how to navigate that. Generational trauma is very real, and that's something that's not talked about enough. Generational trauma is also known as intergenerational trauma or transgenerational trauma, referring to the transmission of the traumatic experiences that can be passed down from one generation to the next. And it occurs when individuals witness or experience a severe or prolonged adversity period, such as abuse, trauma, natural disasters, systemic oppression, adversity. And that can be really hard to talk about and can be very sensitive as a subject to deal with. We think about learned behaviors. Our parents and caregivers who've experienced trauma in their lives may pass unhealthy coping mechanisms and beliefs, morals, attitudes down to their children. And that trauma can alter gene expression and actually lead to changes in the body's physiological response to stress that may be passed on to future generations. And for me, I think of when I was pregnant with my son, all of the stress I felt during that time period, all of the alcohol abuse that I was with this person who had that, and the yelling and the screaming, that has passed down to my children. And thank goodness I'm trying to break the cycle for myself. I'm trying to admit really, really vulnerably that I can see how things have affected my children and have affected me. And children who witness or experience traumatic events themselves may even develop those symptoms of trauma, which can be passed along to their children. So anything that we've witnessed as moms, we can pass those on to our children if we don't acknowledge that and we don't really find ways on how to cope with our trauma. And, that all goes back to self-care, taking care of your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And that's where we take our power back. Seeking professional help can provide individuals with those tools and strategies to help cope with that trauma. And seeking professional help may not always be the right answer. We might not be ready to do that, right? So I hope that this conversation can provide some real honest and truthful feedback on how I've dealt with things in my life. Working with family members to build those healthy relationships, setting those boundaries and sharing experiences may be a place to start for you. Looking at developing coping mechanisms together, sit down with your spouse. And one thing that I found is really helpful is sitting down once a week, talking about the really hard conversations to have. Are you feeling supported? Are you feeling heard? What can you change as a couple to make a team dynamic in your household? Because children learn from watching. We are their role models. We are shaping and setting that tone of what they are going to think is normal, and being able to set a healthy example on what that looks like. Prioritizing your spouse above your children. Yes, I said that, you guys. I said that. Prioritizing your spouse above your children, because that sets the tone, showing them that mom and dad are on a team. Mom and dad are in this together, and mom and dad are going to work to be the healthiest versions of themselves for those children. One of the ways that we can do this is by discussing with our spouses or our partners what we expect as realistic expectations in our parenting styles. For me, and I think for other moms as well, it's hard to let go of that control when our husbands or, the authoritative parent are taking control and disciplining our children and having that firm voice or even yelling. So it's hard for us to let go of that because moms are nurturers by nature, right? And there's 4 types of parenting styles. Authoritarian, which I think I said that word right, authoritarian. I cannot even say that. But strict and demanding with little room for negotiation. So that's that control, right? Authoritative is firm but supportive with clear rules and expectations, open communication. Permissive is laid back and indulgent, allowing children that freedom without so many rules. And uninvolved or neglected is neglectful with little and emotional involvement in parenting. For me and my husband, we have that authoritative parenting, and that's generally considered the healthiest parenting style, but there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There is no right or wrong answer unless there's abuse going on, and then that is not okay. But, that authoritative parenting is supportive and responsive and allows for that open communication, which again, if you're showing your children by leading by example with that open communication with your spouse, then that sets the clear expectations to have those boundaries, to have those limits and explain why they exist. And that fosters independence, that encourages children to think for themselves and have a sense of independence and empowerment in themselves, which again, it takes time and there is no right or wrong answer. I'm just sharing what has worked for me, what has worked for my family, and being really honest in the fact that I have not been an emotionally regulated mom. I have lost my shit. I have broken things. I have cried into a pillow. I have driven around because I just didn't know what to do. I had to leave the house at times because, and I still do, because I know that taking that time and just leaving sometimes just needs to happen. And it's hard to admit that out loud. But I want to normalize the fact that we are living in really stressful times. And sometimes we are just shown that perfect, ideal life that does not exist. It doesn't. There is no mom who has her shit all together. And we need to support each other. We need to be honest. We need to say, hey, you know what? I'm having a really hard time and I don't know what to do. So I want you guys to hear this, and I want you to really understand that I support all of you. All of you who are listening, I support you. I think that you guys are beautiful. I think that you are an amazing mom. And I want you to practice that. Look in the mirror. Really remind yourself that you are beautiful. You are worth it. You can get through the hard shit. I'm just going to keep it real, you guys. I told you. You can get through the hard shit and you can come out on top. You can learn. It's never too late to learn. I think that's a fallacy that we are force fed in society, is that we can't break patterns and we can't grow. And we can. That's the beauty of the world that we live in. We can wake up and choose to be kind. We can wake up and choose to live a different life if we need to. I'm not saying to, take off and move to a different state all of a sudden, but we can wake up in the morning and we can choose to, instead of yelling at our children or, swearing at our spouse, we can choose to take a deep breath and show some grace and remind ourselves that everyone is going through really hard shit. This is not an easy time in anyone's lives. And the person sitting next to you is going through something. The person across the street walking is going through something. We are all going through things, and it's okay to not know what to do or not have an answer. But little changes, little things add up to big wins and lifelong changes. Motherhood is the greatest thing and the hardest thing all rolled into one. And when you're feeling really overwhelmed and when you're feeling like you can't take anymore, because I've been there and I understand, remind yourself that you were chosen to be this child's mother. You were entrusted with this child's life. And we need to remember to set that example of what we want our children to be, even though it's hard. And I just want you guys to remember to give yourself some grace. And with that being said, I hope you all have a great day. And I will see you next time. Bye.